Hello there! Welcome to this video. We're learning about FileMaker in these videos. I'm hoping that's why you clicked on the link. My name is Matt Petrowski. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some developer tables. All right, so developer tables. Actually, first, before we get started with that, I'm going to look off screen here, make sure the video is actually showing my desktop, and it is. If you watched yesterday's video or the previous video in this series, either live or in the rebroadcast, there was a question at the very end of the chat from Lee Smith. I was talking about field naming, and he asked the question of, is there a bulk way to rename your fields according to FileMaker standards? And my immediate response was no, you have to just do it by hand. But then I thought, and this is the cool thing about FileMaker, there typically is a way to solve something. I mentioned that you'd have to use SQL and that FileMaker really only had the full SQL exposed through a plugin. But actually, FileMaker's own Execute SQL does allow you to access information about the fields. So check this out. If you want to follow along, and I suggest that you do because it's the best way to learn, you're going to choose a Get Started, and dialog's going to come up. I'm going to quickly scroll down towards the bottom. Now I'm using a copy of FileMaker 16 as of the shooting of this video. There's this option right here of Explore Possibilities, and See Advanced Solutions is what you're going to want to click on. That's FileMaker 16. If it's changed in 17 or a previous version, ultimately, we're trying to get to this dialog box, and we're trying to pick this option right here of invoices. So when we select on this, you'd be able to choose this. Now, I already have one on my desktop. I'm going to call this one Invoices 2, just so we don't get confused, as long as I hit the right key there. And we'll save that one. And so up will come my Invoices 2 database. Now, follow along with me on this because this is pretty cool. You don't have to understand everything about what's going on in terms of what I'm going to do, but yesterday's video, when we looked at field naming and the question came up, can I rename all of my fields according to FileMaker standards, or what I was expressing in that previous video? I can make it easier for you as a shortcut. So I'm going to open up Safari here. Let's switch. I'm going to need to show my Safari window. So I took a little while, a few minutes, to actually compose a custom function. Now this is, you're going to find the link down in the comments of this YouTube video. I've also posted it in the chat, but just in case you want to see it, here is the link on screen. I've got it over at Gist, it's a GitHub gist, or however you pronounce that. But basically, once you get here, what you're looking for is this button right here, Raw, on this website. If you click on that, what'll happen is the whole screen just turns into raw FileMaker code. So this allows me to select into this window, just click anywhere in the window, do a Command or Control A, copy this with Command or Control C, go over to my FileMaker database, and then add it as a custom function. So let's hide that window in the background, and we go to now Manage Custom Functions. If you've watched the previous video in this series, this should not be a scary thing. When the custom functions come up, we're going to click on the New button. It's going to allow us to paste this code in, which I'll do right here. I'm going to scroll to the top, and I've already given you the name of the function, which you can put right here for the name of the function, and then the parameters, you simply need to paste those in as well. So we copy those and we paste that in. You do have to click the little plus, remember that. We click the plus, and so that's really all I have to do. I don't have to understand this particular custom function. In fact, you don't have to understand any custom function as long as it works, unless you want to check and make sure that it's doing what you think it should be doing. But with this function in here now, in this particular database, if you've got a regular copy of FileMaker Pro, you're going to have to create a calculated field. You're going to have to go into your defined database in order to do this. If, however, like me, you have a copy of FileMaker Advanced, then you have access to these wonderful tools of the data viewer and the debugger. So let's take a quick look at how this function actually works. I'll use the data viewer here in this copy. I will create a watch variable, click on the little plus, and that will create my expression. Now, Actually, one thing before we do this, we need to actually take a look at what this function is expecting. Well, I'll type it right here. FileMaker standards. It is expecting, as is highlighted, a table occurrence name. So as I mentioned, FileMaker's documentation is sometimes sketchy. Sometimes it uses table occurrence name. Sometimes it uses table name. And you may be confused as a new FileMaker learner, but don't be, because it's pretty easy. When we look at the defined database, tables are all listed here. All of our table names are in our tables. Most of the time when FileMaker says, give me a table, or what is the table that you want to use, it is typically referring to a table occurrence name. That's any one of these items right here. So I would be able to pass it invoices, but if it was named something else like invoices blah, that's the name of the table occurrence. And when FileMaker asks for a table, it's typically thinking of a table occurrence, not the name of the table. So I wouldn't specify invoices the name of the table. I would specify the table occurrence name. So let's go ahead and change that back right there, invoices, and we say OK, and we zoom out. Say OK, I'm going to go back to that data viewer and create that watch variable and just type that that stuff in. So FileMaker standards, the name of the table occurrence that I want. Let's put in invoices. And boom, there you go. This is just a very quick and dirty hack of a tool that if you wanted to follow along, according to what I showed in the previous video about naming conventions, what this particular custom function does is it goes and it grabs all of the fields for a particular table and then basically renames them. So if you have your own standards that you would like to follow and not necessarily FileMaker standards, you can go take the time, try to look at the let function that I have in that custom function that we just put into this database or that you're copying off of the web, and make it work how you want. Now, it's not perfect, but you can see that all the globals, it's actually taking all of the globals and putting them in all uppercase, and anything that has spaces, it's actually adding the underscores. Same with possible unstored. You can see that it's actually prefixing the unstored, which is what I do on all of my particular unstored calculation fields, because I like to know that they're unstored before I add them to my layout. It is not actually doing the lower. I didn't take the time to actually put that in. So again, it's not perfect. I would have to select all this, copy, go put it into my my actual field name. Well, let's see what it looks like, this invoice plural. So I basically select all of this, copy it, put it into a text document so that I can have that window open at the same time that I have my FileMaker defined fields open. So I can just copy and paste between the two. I don't think I need to show you that. But let's just copy this one unstored invoice label plural. And so I would go over to my defined database. I would switch to my fields on my invoices record, and I would go to wherever that is. It's always easiest to sort by type. And there it is right there, invoice label plural. So I would just paste right here. Hopefully my head's not blocking that. And I'd have to change that to a lowercase I in order to fit my conventions. Change, and then boom. And I would do that for the rest of the fields. If you want to do that, that's what I have done into the invoices database from this lesson moving forward, because we're going to be using the invoices database in order to learn from how we can best approach and develop within FileMaker, mostly because it's not too complex of a database. All right, so that was hopefully not too long. That was about a nice little 7-minute explanation there, but it's a very useful tool that you can now use if you ever want to bulk rename or get a bulk collection of all of the fields from a particular table and be able to rename really quickly. All right, so I'm going to close this file down because I have my already renamed copy, which I'm opening right now. And just like yesterday when we were talking about it, if I go into invoices here and I sort by either field type or by field name, we get the result I was looking for that we learned about in the last video. We get everything is pretty much, all lower camel case is how I name my fields. All key fields are prefixed with ID, the primary being ID, and then you have ID underscore whatever foreign table this particular field is connecting to. Also note this is something that is very good to use if you want, is the comments down here. If you don't use FileMaker's comments a whole lot, I actually suggest that you at least minimally do this in terms of your key fields, especially when you get key fields that are used for showing things within the user interface, but don't really tie directly to your structure. And we'll distinguish between those as we move forward here. But in this particular case, I might put primary key here as a note, change that, and then put foreign key for these. EIGN key. Copy that, change that one, and change this one. Now, as you develop, this becomes really helpful because initially FileMaker shows you all of this information right here. Everything about the field, whether it's auto enter, index, global, etc. But when you click right here and you toggle this, you get to see just your notes. So now all of a sudden I can see, okay, what is the primary key? What is the foreign key? And again, going back to the naming and the conventions, if you use the comments as well in order to name things in terms of their relative use, it makes it easier for you to understand your own database. So of course, that's beyond just giving the name of the field, something that's very clear to understand. All right, so today's topic, we're on that, developer tables, and how does it relate to fields? Well, obviously, in all of our FileMaker solution, we have multiple perspectives. We have the perspective of primarily our user interface right here, but that is the user's perspective, and it doesn't make sense to me as the developer when I need to see specific things. Now, there's one thing that we're going to fix in this database. First off, we're going to go into Define Database, and we're on the dashboard here. I'm going to switch to the invoices because that's what we're going to deal with. Now, first off, if you watched my first videos that I believe in the environment, or no, it's probably in this segment of fields and calculations, I talked about that this is not something that I do. I do not use FileMaker's serial number, nor would I actually suggest you use FileMaker's serial number for any real-world modern database. It's just not the way to go. We live in a semi-disconnected world. You're not always connected. You will inevitably have a situation where you want to be able to take a database out, won't have a wireless connection, won't have any connection, and you still want to be able to collect data and then bring that back to the mothership. In order to do that, you need to actually use a UUID key. So I'm going to switch this key value to FileMaker's get UUID. Now, this may cause a problem in some FileMaker database systems where users are used to looking up, especially in the case of invoices, values based on, okay, so you get a call. Yes, my invoice number is 501. That number is much easier for a user to use than this UUID that we're going to use, which is can be very long in terms of a string. But we're going to learn how to actually reference UUIDs as well. So let's change this. I'm going to take off the serial number. I am going to leave this as do not replace existing. And like I talked about when we looked at field options, it's another video in this series. You can go back a few numbers. I'm going to turn on prohibit modification, because I do not want to allow this to ever be modified by anybody. Validation, I might be tempted to actually turn on the unique value, but in this case, I'm not. Mostly because I don't want FileMaker to have to go check for unique values, and I trust that FileMaker is actually going to create that unique value. I'm also going to prefer to keep these set right here. I'm not going to allow a user to override, so I'm going to uncheck that. And validating always in this field, if I clicked always right here, it means that my scripts would also validate and make sure that it's valid based on all of these settings. But of course, I'm not turning on any of those settings, so it really doesn't matter. And this is just a matter of habit of checking this off of my primary key. So another thing that we need to change is we actually need to change the type. Now, FileMaker's UUID generates an alphanumeric value or an alphanumeric string, so this being set as a number won't work. Because on both sides of our relationships, the field type needs to be exactly the same. So I'm going to change this to a text field so that it's actually a key value that will work. Now we'll have to change this in the rest of our relationships we'll take a look at that, but we're going to get to the part of developer tables, and we're also going to address the fact that we just took away our human readable version of an invoice number. This is where we add that field back in. You can always have multiple different forms of something that's unique to a particular record. You can have a human readable version of something, and you can have your behind the scenes version. Your behind the scenes version of a primary key, my suggestion is to always use a UUID. Now that can be, as FileMaker 16 has here, an alphanumeric string, or if future versions of FileMakers ever offer anything like a number, or you can use a custom function currently in order to create a pure number string. And it may be longer, but it's a little bit faster. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new field down here at the bottom. Zoom out just a little bit, and it is simply going to be invoice number. So this is going to be my human readable version of a string that the user can actually use when they're searching for an invoice. And I might even put something like human readable key. Let's call it that. Now this one, I can make a number, and I can create that, and when I double click in order to add my options in my auto enter options, I can use that serial number option. Now this is convenient because it allows me to actually have that automatically incrementing number. Each new invoice gets its own number. And this may be something that you didn't know, but here in this particular setting, in the serial number, you can actually put, even though this field is a number field, you can actually put in a string in here. But yet when you search the field, because the field type is a number, it'll still be searched as a number. So if I wanted to put in INV-000, FileMaker will even account for the fact that those preceding zeros still need to stay there, even though it's a number field. So we should talk about on creation versus on commit just a little bit. When this number is generated, FileMaker by default is an auto commit application, meaning it takes care of the dirty work for you. It assumes that as soon as you exit a field or switch a record or run a script that causes that record to be committed, anything that you do as a byproduct of the user interface, by default, FileMaker is set up to basically just submit that to server and save the data. It saves it for you. Now you can turn that off, and this is an advanced technique that we will find out way down the road, or maybe in a series that I cover off of this YouTube series, where basically turning transactions on is something that you end up wanting to use in a very high-use database when you've got a lot of multiple people connected and a lot of connections. But let's take a look at what's going to happen here with this invoice number. So now I have my two key values. My ID, which is my primary key, sacred, that's a UUID, and that's what we want to use. The invoice number is now something that's human readable and the users can use. So we're going to take a trip over to the invoices section and add that in, see what it looks like. Click on the invoices. I don't have an invoice. Let's just create a new record. I know that FileMaker has a menu. And we can see right here that this does not work for the users. This is my UUID string. And it's going to be hidden. It's going to be the reason that we need a developer table. So we need to switch that. I'm going to go into layout mode here. I'm going to move these fields off. FileMaker has a number of fields stacked up here, it looks like. I actually, I know what FileMaker is doing here, just in case I'll explain it in case you don't. Invoice is going to be switched from my ID field to a merge field, which is my invoice number now. So I'm going to zoom out. We're going to find that under the insert menu where we can actually insert a merge field. And that allows us to basically put any field onto the layout as a piece of text, not as an actual field, which many times is a pretty good thing to do. So there's my invoice number right there. And that's what I want to use. You can see that FileMaker made that a little bit big, and we will scroll that down. I also want this field, the field that is actually searchable, to also be the invoice number. So I just double-clicked that field. Now I don't know exactly why FileMaker has this here stacked. I think it is the label for when FileMaker goes into find mode. If I have to take a guess about this, that's what it's probably going to be. I can see that it's got this little eye icon on the actual object, that means that FileMaker's hide calculation is set for this. And I'm going to bet, even though I haven't gone into this, there it is right there, when the get window mode is equal to 0 or not is empty invoices ID, and it only applies in find mode. So basically what they're doing is they are using this field or this text block in order to normally show a value on the record. But when you go into find mode, what they want to reveal is they want to reveal this field so that you can use it for FileMaker's query by find mode. And this is just the label for that. So I'm going to guess that that probably gets aligned right there. And this one gets aligned right here. I don't know. I'd have to play with it and go into find mode. Go into browse mode, save my changes, and we'll just try it out. Try find mode with Command F, and that's what it is. They're showing the label in find mode. So we'll go back into browse mode with Command or Control B. There we go, invoice 0001. Let's create another invoice, just a Command in or Control in. And look at that. Isn't that cool that now what we can use is we can use our human readable key that anybody can come in and do a find and look for. I want to look for invoice number 2, and it's not going to find any criteria. I'll have to investigate why that is. Let's see if it wants those 000s. And see if that actually finds, bugger. We'll have to find out what's going on with that in terms of why it's not working exactly like that. But trust me, it is something that you can do where you're able to search just for that particular value, or set up your search so that you're able to search for just the number without having to put in INV002. Just out of curiosity, I'm going to try that. INV, see if it's actually messing with me here. It is. For some reason, it wants that INV. But the point being, you can inject a string into a serial value, and you're still going to be able to, you could use an auto enter in order to clean that, and then just display INV and only store the 02. Hopefully you understand that with an auto enter, you can really push the data into whatever structure you want. Awesome. So what do we need now? Because we've changed the whole view of our solution. This is what the user is going to see, but it's definitely not what we are going to see. In fact, we got a lot of uglies. It looks like down here, FileMaker did its auto add thing. Wonderful. I just dislike it when FileMaker adds things. So now we need to create some developer tables. And what are developer tables? They are tables that you create for yourself as the developer. You need to see how things are connected. How are they wired up? In this example FileMaker database, really the only way to see what this invoice would be linked to in terms of certain line items, and we haven't wired that up in the interface. I'm going to have to do that in the relationship graph, and I won't take the time to do it right now. But we need to be able to see, okay, what is the actual key value of this invoice? So this is where we need to create these developer layouts. Now I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to go to Manage and then Layouts. As I mentioned, these are the areas that you're in the most within FileMaker, so it's best to learn this key and learn this key, Command-Shift-D and Command-Shift-L. Once we bring that up and we do our wonderful little trick of a Command-A or Control-A, and I'm going to use the Option key and the arrow key, then I'm just going to go that way, and it's going to shrink everything down. I'm going to make a new folder called Developer. Now this is a folder for me as the developer in this solution to store. I didn't want to move that one. I wanted to drag this one right here up. This is for me to store layouts that only I am ever going to be able to see. In fact, I'm going to intentionally turn this off, and now I'm just going to create a new layout. That new layout, it can be based off of the invoices table occurrence, which in turn points to the invoices table. And the way that I typically name my developer layouts is with the @ symbol. It's just a standard that I had created a while back, and I always name the developer table the exact same name, or the layout, I should say, which is what we're creating right now. The layout the exact same as the actual record itself. The table occurrence. In fact, what I do is on the graph, I create a dedicated table occurrence that's also named this as well. So let's go take the time to do that. We can always reassociate things within FileMaker. So I don't have to go do that before I create the layout. I can create the layout now and then go do that. So the at invoices, developer layout is going to be right here in this developer folder. Again, I'm going to uncheck this. Nobody's ever going to see this or have access to this except for me as the developer, so that I can see primary keys and what's going on. And I do this for all of the base tables, not for all of the table occurrences, mind you, all of the base tables. So we go into Define Database, and we are now going to switch to the relationship graph. So FileMaker, as this file is set up, basically just has the raw structure. In fact, yours will look differently. We can compare and contrast these if you want to really quickly. Let's open up that recent file of my invoices too. We'll compare and contrast. So this is the file that I saved from FileMaker prior to me actually reorganizing things, and I'll tell you why I reorganized them. First off, this did not make a whole lot of sense to me. In fact, there is a very common method for hooking things up in the world of FileMaker as a new FileMaker learner, and they call it anchor buoy. Now, I don't fully subscribe to it myself. When it works, I do, but we're going to get into a whole video about graph organization and how you structure your database, because what happens is you get something like this. Now, in order for you as a new user to come in and understand this, it may not make sense, mostly because this file that FileMaker is providing you with does not provide any degree of guidance. It's basically just table occurrences thrown into this graph, and you now have to decipher this graph. So I have a wonderful lesson that will be coming up talking about how I choose to use colors, labeling, naming. We have access to all of them. I can select on this and I can choose to make it a given color, orange or red. I also have the ability to add notes into this graph where I can tell myself stuff. And it's really helpful to tell yourself stuff. And look, I can even control the font and make this really crazy if I want to, in order to tell myself goofy stuff. That's going to be a very important thing. But what I did just initially, because we're going to save that for another video at another time, is rather than having this, the primary structure in this particular database is, as an invoices database, it is this table occurrence and these right here. This is the primary structure. All of the rest of this stuff in this database is basically just extra. It's extra stuff for the purpose of functionality. The core of the data structure are these table occurrences right here in the middle of the screen. I have invoices. Those invoices have data. They're connected to products, and those products, I have orders for those products. I haven't determined, because I haven't gone into the database enough to know what the structure is, but that's the core. So for me, I want to see the core of the database. Then I want to put all of the extra stuff and arrange it in an order that makes sense to me. So that's sort of what I've done over here on the other database. So that was FileMaker's before I actually started messing with it. This one is now my version, where it's a little bit more clear. We have invoices, above it we have dashboards, and then going from a right to left, that just happens to be the language that I'm using, English. Then I've got, these are going to be my extra tables, which I can probably create a visual separation, and then this is the core right here. And so that reads a little bit easier for me, and I would probably make notes and use colors, and again, we'll get into that. So these developer tables, where do they actually exist? Well, I have one for invoices, and I'm holding down the Option key as I drag this. And again, like I mentioned, I make a dedicated table occurrence for each base table, and I simply just name it the same. Now, in this situation, we're going to have a conflict right here. This table occurrence is already named invoices after the base table itself. As I double click, we can see that the name of the table occurrence is invoices. It's pointing to the invoices table. Now, I can get around that by actually adding that prefix. That's why I started using the prefix. Is if in my graph that maintains the structure of my database, I wanted to use the base table, I could do that and just keep it. Now, I don't tend to. So I just basically chose a value. In this case, at invoices allowed me to have a common naming system throughout all of the different elements that are tied to that particular system. So here, this table occurrence is not connected to any other table occurrences. There's no structure. It's just a raw pointer to the invoices table that I can hook my layout off of. And so I will do that for all of the table occurrences. And again, here's the easy way for working within the graph or anything. I love the option drag because it's a little bit easier than coming down here, clicking plus, choosing to, I now need align items. I'm now going to take off this 2 and I'm going to go to the front and put the @ symbol and say, okay. FileMaker is going to throw that somewhere on the layout. I have no idea where. Many times it depends on where it can find space, and sometimes it'll be completely off to the side, all the way over here. And then I have to drag it over here, and then I have to collapse it down, and then have you noticed that I've been saying, and then I, and then I, and then I? It's much easier to just do this. Just option drag this and double click and reassign. As soon as I click line items, FileMaker will rename it for me, and then all I have to do is just go down there and hit my @ symbol. There, I have a table occurrence now named line items. Did I already have one named line items 2? I didn't want that 2 on there. There we go. Now I just want another one. So I option drag that one and I double click. I want one for people. So I'm going to get rid of that and put on my @ symbol right there. It's pretty easy. Use that option drag. Very handy. So with these base tables, or these table let's call them developer table occurrences, which point to the base tables underneath, now I create a new layout for each of these, and we're going to see what I actually do. So here, this particular layout, we can see that this layout is named @invoices, but it's still pointing to that table occurrence of the one that's integrated into the graph. In other words, it's pointing to this one right here when I want it to point to this one right here, this isolated table occurrence. So as we get out of this, I'll zoom out, say OK. I'm going to reassign this layout. Again, multiple ways to do that. You can go up to the layout setup itself and choose that one. Or you can do it within the Manage Layouts area. So this dialog comes up. Over here, same thing. I can just double click, same dialog will come up. And I simply want to show records from the @invoices. It's a very simple thing. Everything matches everything else, like for like. So I have an @invoices layout that ties to the @invoices table occurrence, which ties to the invoices table. Hopefully that makes sense. And I do that for each and every one of my tables. Yes, every one, even if it only has just a few pieces of data. So now we add the fields to this. There's one thing that we do prior to that, though. I should have stayed in that Manage dialog box, but we'll just get to it from the layout setup. Views. As I mentioned, FileMaker, I did this in the video prior, FileMaker always chooses, hey, you're going to want all of the views. No, I don't want all of the views. In fact, for my developer tables and my developer tables only, I choose to use table view and I turn off list and form view. I also click on properties because here is where you can optionally show the header, the footer, the bottom, and the top navigation. I also don't like FileMaker's very harsh gray lines for dividers, so I opt to set those gray lines to a very subtle gray line. And if I'm dealing with container image data where I want to see more of the image data, this option of use a custom height down at the bottom actually becomes really helpful. I would switch this to points, and then let's say I wanted a 50-point high row within table view rather than what I think is normal is probably something like 16. But I'll turn that off because I'm looking at just the data behind the scenes. So I say OK, and now we need to add our fields. So I'm going to use the field picker. I'm going to access that with Command or Control K. That's going to come up and it's going to allow me to just click in here and just do a Command or Control A to select all of them and drag them all. Now remember, down at the bottom we have our drag options, and I can choose to not have a label on these fields. In fact, I choose not to have a label for these developer layouts primarily because the table view is already going to show me a header above all of the fields. So if I just drag them out, there will maybe more fields than there is size for the layout. So we just say, yes, go ahead and resize that out. And then what I have is I now have my developer table. This is exactly what I want to be able to see behind the scenes. Now I'm going to drag this part a little bit beyond those and move that field back up just so I know what's going on. Go into browse mode. And here is my wonderful developer table. This is what allows me to see everything that I want to see when I'm going to develop, and I can do it at the same time. So here, as I'm developing on the interface, here I'm going to switch to the invoice details. Here I'm working on the user interface, and this is when I'm able to, go into layout mode, move things around, make it look how I want. But I still can't see what's the primary key of this particular field. Now, there are some tricks that I could do. I could put the primary key on this layout and actually only show that primary key to myself as the developer, and then any other time anybody else is logged in, they don't see it. You would do that with the hide calculation right here in the fourth area, where we would hide object when. We would actually use a developer custom function, which I showed very early in this series. You can definitely put fields onto your layout and make them only visible to yourself as the developer. But my preferred way of working is to basically, whenever you're working typically with a couple of dedicated tables, and you're composing a script. So here all I have to do is when I show manage layouts with Command-Shift-L, I just select on the invoices and I open that alongside with whatever I'm working on. And maybe I'll put that down at the bottom of my layout, and I can switch and go back and forth in between as I'm developing. Here I can see what's going on behind the scenes, and here I can see what's going on. So in this case, if I wanted to, I can simply, find the record that I'm looking for, or within this down here, I need to find INV-0002. What key is that? Oh, okay, it's this key right here, and I can see all the other records that this particular record is connected to. Now, if you're a new FileMaker learner and you haven't gotten used to the relational structure and the way things are wired up, we're going to have that being covered in an upcoming new section of this series, and that's basically where we're talking about how do you structure your data? How do you actually decide where to split things out? What data should go in which table, and when do I create a join table, and what is a join table, and how does all of it interconnect so that it's stored most efficiently versus how quickly you want to get the data. And we'll look at that. But here's my parting tip for you, because I'm 6 minutes over my 30. If you've got your questions, make sure and get those prepared to put in the chat, and we'll head to those. Here's the way that you actually read UUID values. You do not have to know or remember the whole long string of a UUID. You can either pick the very front of the string or the end of the string, and that's the easiest way to think of this. So when I think of this, this is invoice number 2. It is UUID 9D35. And that's basically all I have to do. Now, many times that's what's actually shown, unless you actually drag the field all the way out so that you can see the full field, which sometimes it's helpful to do. In that case, you might actually reference this based on the last few digits, 14E1 or 914E1. And basically, that's how you start to think about your records when you are developing. You don't think of your records in terms of just record number 2 or record number 4, because we don't want to use those serial numbers. We want to use UUIDs because it gives us a much greater degree of flexibility, and then we think about them in terms of their shorthand version. And most of the time, I will put this, I'll leave you with one more parting tip. Always good to know things in FileMaker, and that's why you're watching these videos, is so that you can learn more from my experience. In FileMaker's table view, I can take the time to rearrange these fields and drag the primary key first, which is what I tend to do. In all of my developer tables, it's always keys first, then data, and whatever data you want to reference, which means in this particular database, it would be key first and then foreign keys next. We can see right there, ID, ID people, ID products. So I know that this is connecting to the people table and this one is connecting to the products table. Instantly recognizable. Here is a trick in FileMaker's layout mode. Rather than rearranging these however you want, due date, invoice method, blah, 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 if they are not in the order that you would like, FileMaker will pay attention to the order in which the fields are arranged in layout mode for tables. This is really pretty cool. We go into layout mode, and notice that in this particular situation, date, date payment, and due date are the first fields. Let's go back into browse mode. We go back into browse mode, and I am going to right-click on any of the headers. I'm going to go down to the option of table view, and notice that there's this option right here to reset. Now, reset simply says I want you to reset this particular table view according to the arrangement order of the fields on the layout. So when I reset this, we get this little prompt that says restore to default. Look at that, date, date payment, due date. So if you would like your primary keys to come first, or you prefer a certain order to view in your developer tables, just arrange the fields as such. I arrange mine as such. FileMaker, I would like to see my ID keys as the first fields. Go back into browse mode, right click, choose table, choose reset, get the prompt, say OK, and your keys are always going to be first. So as long as you put your fields in the stacked order that you would like to see them in table view, it makes it really, really helpful. All right, so 40 minutes already, whoosh. Let's get to our questions for this particular video. See if we've got anything loaded up as I switch to the chat and open up those questions. Let's see them, make sure come on the video. Perfect. All right. So here's what we've got for questions. Hey, Lee. Hey, David. Nathan, thank you for checking in. Eric, got a few more new people here too. Hi, great course. Congratulations. Lima, Peru. Awesome. Antonio. Always nice learning. Let's scroll down a little bit more. Looks like we have no questions. All right. Oh, there's one. I tried using the @layout method, but found that with it not being related to anything, I have trouble looking at data in foreign tables. Okay. So I'm going to assume that that question is related to the fact that when you go into your defined database in here, and you have this disconnected set of table occurrences. So right here, I have a situation where I've got all of these developer tables over here, which are isolated, and for a reason. I'm typically using them for me as a developer. They're only for my purpose and for being able to have a table view of the data. But yet I'm not able to actually see the related data. So the question, the response here is in regards to if I'm looking at invoices, let's say invoice number 2, and I want to see what line items are related or coming, tied to that invoice number 2 over here in line items, then I need to be able to have them connected via this relationship, obviously. If I'm looking at my developer table over here of invoices, it's not connected to anything, so I can't really see that. Well, in that regard, if you do want to see data, typically what I end up doing is I do end up looking at that data on the actual user interface. In this case, it's not that big of a deal because on our invoices, on our layout tied to this table occurrence, we're already going to have a portal of line items. But there's multiple ways to look at that on your actual user interface view. But also what I've done as I develop is I don't have a problem with temporarily taking this right here and just simply exposing this. And this is a little trick that you can do. Notice that there's nothing here for me to actually wire this up. I don't have my ID fields. I'm actually sort of a lazy FileMaker developer. I could click this little arrow and I could take, I scrolled past it. Oh, I'm going to click that. Okay, there it is right there. I could do that, or I could resize this and drag it out. But you notice that when it's really small, here's a little thing that I do. It doesn't make sense. I just wire up date to date. I just do it really quickly. Any field, a random field, who cares? And then double click the relationship and then find ID and connect it to ID invoices and just click change. So that's just something that I do that makes it a little bit easier, and I click OK. So this doesn't actually bother me to do this and then rename this to something like dev temp. FileMaker allows you to create umpteen billion objects, and so if I temporarily wire this up just for the purpose for me to see things on my developer view, I will do that. Sometimes I get lazy and I don't clean up, but it would look like this. On this particular layout, what I would tend to do is, let's zoom out here, I would go into layout mode, and then here's a little trick that you can do. I will basically just resize the footer to be really large. And then I will put my portal and just drag that. And here, as a developer table, I don't have to worry about a lot of the rest of my connections that are in the rest of my solution. Here I just get a pure connection. What do I want to see as the developer? Well, I can look at this particular connection where I know that my developer table of invoices is connected directly to my line items. Show me those records. I want to see what's related. And let's take a look at the item right there. Boom. Go into browse mode, and there we go. What's really cool is as I'm looking, I can select on the record, and whatever record I select on, the footer will actually reveal the contents within the portal. And it's a very quick way to actually see the data. So that's just one of the ways that I actually solve that issue with my developer tables. And then later on down the road, it doesn't bother me to go into define database. Yeah, I solved that problem. Just get rid of that. It's a very temporary thing where it doesn't necessarily deal with the structure of my database, which is what all those table occurrences are for. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you can do. You just go in, delete the portal, select your size on your footer, hit 44, and you're back to normal in no time. And so that's how I would actually address that particular issue with developer tables. For example, using the data viewer to look at related data. All right, cool. So there we go. Now that makes sense. Yeah, FileMaker is so flexible with its naming and its ability to add and remove things that I treat FileMaker more like a little bit of Play-Doh, where I really don't get too scared that I'm putting myself in a corner. Now, with complex structure, you can put yourself in a corner, but for the most part, data is like water. You can get it to flow wherever you want it to flow, and you can restructure things in a way that makes sense. All right, so that is going to be a wrap for today's video. I got a few comments on some of the videos that said, don't make it shorter than 30 minutes, and so I guess if this is working for everybody, then that's what I will keep doing. As always, if you're interested in more FileMaker information, you are definitely welcome and encouraged to go over and check out my website of FileMakerMagazine.com. I had a user accidentally loaded there. So there's your URL right there. It is FileMakerMagazine.com. Check it out. Subscription is extremely reasonable. You get code and example files that you can copy and paste and help you along your development career while you're learning about FileMaker outside of the series that I'm putting out here on YouTube. So I think what that's going to do is give us a wrap for today, and we are going to be able to say goodbye. And much luck with your own FileMaker development. You can click the subscribe here to be notified via YouTube, and the next video in this series will probably show up here as soon as I shoot it. Until next time, see you later.